Glasses on, glasses off, glasses on. Let's go with on today. I know there's a glare, but that's because of the lights. Actually, maybe we won't. Funny part about my eyes is I only use these usually for driving and certain other activities. All other times, eyes are fine. I'm getting to bifocals age. That's a little alarming. Sorry about the audio. My microphone that I usually record my videos with is, I think I might have to get a new one. So we're gonna make do with the phone microphone because it's all I got right now. So let's get into chapter 2. I think I said there might be a little surprise for today. We'll wait until tomorrow, or maybe even later in the video. So, going along with the chapter a day, we're going to read chapter 2 today. Chapter 2 introduces the other 2 characters in Ashes in Winter, and then we start into moving into the plot's starting. Like, it started last chapter. So here we go. Chapter 2. Daniel Wither rubbed his hands together and shivered as he stepped out of the elevator. While there was heat, the small room never quite warmed up with the constant flow of people in and out of the parking garage. It's going to be a cold one tonight, he thought, pulling his gloves on before pushing and holding the door open for the tall woman just behind him. You are going home sometime today, aren't you? Asked Victoria Santini. She paused as a shiver ran through her tall frame before striding forward. Daniel lifted a brow as he had to push himself to keep up. While in the building, she had limited herself to a shorter stride so that others could keep a reasonable pace with her. Now that she was outside, her normal stride became apparent. Despite the 2-inch heels on her boots, even if those heels were on the chunkier side, not stilettos, Victoria had a few inches of height on him. There were not too many people who didn't. Daniel Wither was on the shorter side of average, and the nearly 5'11" Victoria was at least a few inches taller than he was. Her heels made the difference that much more pronounced. No, but my daughters and sons-in-law, yes, answered Daniel, shaking his head as he had to almost jog to keep up with her. My daughter has a huge holiday week planned for her friends and family. I think she'd have plenty for dinner or to drink if you went out to see her. Thanks for the invite, and I'd love to see Sherry again, but I have plans as well. So long as I can get there first, she answered as she dropped her purse on the hood of her car and shoved a hand to the bottom. He forced a cough as he covered his mouth with one hand. Miscellaneous items clattered as they were shoved around by her questing hand, and her brows knit together. She blew out a breath and said, "Blasted keys, why are they always at the bottom of my purse?" Daniel tilted his head as he leaned against the heavy cement column. "Merry Christmas, Dan," shouted one of the local police officers. "Looks like more snow. Might want to get out of here while you still can. You too, Madam Mayor." Victoria waved in reply. Daniel gave a half wave as the other police officer drove by him. When the cruiser was out of sight, Daniel turned back to Victoria as she continued to search her purse for her keys. Maybe if you had a smaller purse, you'd find them faster," he suggested. "Maybe something that doesn't quite resemble an overnight bag?" Victoria's eyebrows rose, and Daniel smirked as he met her glare. "Are you trying to tell me my purse is too big?" "I'd never presume to." He trailed off, staring past her. Victoria lifted a brow and half turned around to see what had caught his attention before she turned back to Daniel. He smirked as she looked up at the ceiling and breathed out a near-silent, "Damn it." "Call of Duty?" asked Daniel, ignoring her glare seconds later. "Oh no. I am officially on holidays," began Victoria. "Nicholas, this can wait until after." The assistant stopped, bending over to catch his breath before he stood back up. "I'm sorry, Ms. Piacentini, but there's this colonel from the armed forces insisting on talking to you. He said it was important." "Always is," mused Victoria. She sighed and gave up her search for her keys. "Knowing my luck, I left my car keys up in my office." Daniel snorted and lifted a brow. "You wouldn't be the only person alive to leave their keys on their desk." I didn't see them, offered her assistant. All right, since I have to go back upstairs anyway, you may as well arrange for him to meet me in my office. Have him wait in, began Victoria. He's already waiting in your office, answered her assistant. I'm really sorry, ma'am, but he barged in. Victoria sighed heavily as she brought a hand up to pinch her nose. Dan, I know you're on your way out too, but I would really appreciate it if you could be there with me for this. Why do you need me? Asked Daniel. You're more than able to tear a strip off someone on your own. Yes, that's my point, she answered. I think I need you to keep me from tearing too much of a strip off a pompous arse who thinks he can throw his weight around. It's not too late to run. I do have a car, Daniel pointed out. Don't tempt me, she said, crinkling her nose. He followed her back through the underground garage below City Hall to the entrance. The plain white tile floor, while clean, was scuffed and worn by the thousands of footsteps that walked through here every single day for the nearly 30 years since the 3 towers comprising the square were built. What do you think he wants? Asked Daniel as he stepped inside the elevator. Victoria was right beside him as she leaned on the wooden rail and stared out the glass as the elevator ascended to the 4th floor. I have no idea what he wants, she answered with a shrug, staring down through the glass of the elevator and the wall of windows. She pointed to the snow-filled square just outside these windows. I'll deal with it. I hope whatever it is can be handled quickly so I can just grab my keys and go before we're socked in with snow and can't. She paused and Daniel said, Sheridan's house is in Whitefish? Like I said, don't tempt me. I don't get to see her often enough, answered Victoria, and she grinned. She still has horse crazy, as I remember her being since grade 8. Yep, more so now that she actually has horses. He chuckled as the lift opened and they stepped out onto the carpeted floor. I'll stay here. I'm sure you can resist the urge to murder someone. If not, well, I guess I'll have to arrest you. She stuck her tongue out at him as she walked through the maze of desks to her office, motioning to her assistant to open the door. May as well get this over with, Daniel overheard her say from across the large open room as the door opened. I'm sorry, didn't catch your name. What else she could have said or what the other man said in response was lost as the door closed. Daniel leaned against the rail of the balcony that overlooked the main lobby from 4 floors above. As he stared down at the brown hexagonal tiles of the mezzanine, he saw a small group of uniformed soldiers milled near the security desk. Group of armed soldiers with rifles in their hand? He noted. The first inkling of worry slid into his veins. This isn't a normal meeting, he thought. What the hell is going on? He walked down the stairs, the carpeted steps silencing his steps. Daniel slipped around by the elevator behind the security desk, which hid him from their sight. Daniel sighed heavily. While he had meant to see Victoria out and remind her that one of her friends from high school was having a party over the holidays, there was one other he needed to meet before she headed out to her parents. Daniel took out his BlackBerry and, keeping the camera lens aimed through a gap between his fingers but the rest of the phone hidden, he took a few pictures. He was not familiar with their patches, but he knew someone who was. Failing all else, Terrence or Derek will know what this is all about. Then again, so would Fitz. Okay, I had to take a little bit of a breather to get some water. My throat's getting a little dry. So now we're going to introduce Garrett. A little backstory to Garrett. He's based off my now late uncle. I get when I first wrote the book, he was still very much alive and one of the people that was in support of my novel series. Now that he's passed, I guess it's a way to keep him around that much longer. Looks almost like Derek's Jeep, thought Garrett, but this train of thought disappeared as Garrett pulled up to the military vehicles blocking the road right where the 4 lanes ended. The lights were dark. Garrett crinkled his brows. Strangely, normally when lights stop working, they flash. But these were off. Dark. With the blizzard making visibility murky, he would never have known they were even there. Or the other trucks in the middle of the road. He slowed the truck, noticing as one man pointed at him, but didn't stop. Looking back in his rear view, he could see the others milling about. They didn't do anything to chase after him, though. The snow fell in large flakes, and his headlights did little to dispel the pre-dawn murk. Even as the sun rose, the thick clouds above blocked the warmth from reaching them. The back roads are going to be lonelier than this, he thought, waving at the younger man as he drove by, and he was pleased when the younger man waved back. The headlights on the truck were less than useless. It wasn't as if they didn't work. The problem was Garrett couldn't see the road, let alone past the hood of the truck. He'd already felt the tires slide over one icy patch despite their deep tread. No getting up there tonight, he realized, and barely a single soul in between. Getting stuck in between high falls and the highway had not been in his plans, but there it was. Plans or no, it happened anyway. Garrett pulled the truck over. Not that he could go extremely far off the road, not that it mattered much. He highly doubted that there would be anyone this way before morning, and he wasn't sure if he were already off the side of the road. The road was so clogged of snow, the only reference he had was the clearing between trees with enough room for two vehicles to pass each other if they happened to meet each other. He opened the door and sank to just under his knees. "Jesus Christ," he murmured. A foot and a half of snow, if loose and fresh, had fallen on the road. His truck had left a distinctive track. Not only as tires left track, but the snow was deep enough that the drag of the truck's body over the road had also left similar tracks. His truck had modified suspension lifts, as off-road enthusiasts like to call them, and the tires had deep, aggressive treads. Seeing a path dragged through the snow by the bottom of the truck meant the snow was deeper than the clearance under it. Garrett blew out a breath. And it was still snowing. Hard enough that he could barely see his hand in front of him if he stretched it out. Like driving through milk, he thought. No going back, no going forward. He eyed the back of the truck. Even if he tried to stay in it, it would eventually run out of gas and surely leave him stranded. Also, the heat within relied on the engine kept at a certain RPM, not just idle. There would be some heat, but not a whole lot. Garrett had no desire to freeze to death, and he didn't feel like walking. He wasn't prepared to go camping, but every work truck had at least the basics of survival, including for winter. The roads between mines were sometimes only dirt paths. A breakdown here, with no traffic to flag down, meant contacting the office by satellite phone and waiting for help to arrive. Not the first time I've had to camp out on the side of the road, he thought, but I like to plan that sort of trip beforehand. He took in a breath and slogged around to the other side of the truck. He had to grab the side of the truck as he felt his foot slide and he gasped. Had he moved any further over, he would have put the truck into the ditch. The worst part was that he couldn't even tell there was a ditch. The snow had filled it in. "Son of a," he murmured, and then chuckled, his shoulders relaxing only marginally. "I've had some close calls, but that one was damn close." He couldn't risk breaking an ankle or soaked feet if the ditch had water instead of solid ice. The area here was marshy and then jagged cliffs where it wasn't. Garrett took out a long steel rod from the back of the truck. It wasn't really meant as a ground prod, but it was better than nothing. He poked the ground in the ditch and was rewarded with a solid thunk instead of the crumple of ice breaking. The bottom was hard and unyielding. It was solid. The water that may have been there earlier was now froze like cement. The sides of the ditch felt like concrete, but given the mud was probably frozen, he shrugged, a small sigh escaping his lips. He continued to poke the ground as he moved off the road and towards the bush, noting that the ground rose and trees grew here. Usually, trees meant dry land. It was unlikely that any serious growth, and these trees looked mature with trunks thick enough that his hands wouldn't encircle around them, would really grow in marshy land. They also couldn't get purchased in rocky land to grow without eventually falling over. "Some days, even I get lucky on that front," he mused. "If I had to be stuck on the side of the road, at least I have someplace decent to make camp and stay warm." Garrett went back to the truck and retrieved the camping and survival gear from the truck. It took 4 trips, leaving him tired but not exhausted, even a bit exhilarated, to get what he needed from the truck to his camp spot. He grinned. Camping had always been a favorite pastime in his family. It had been something his father had passed to his sons and then his sons to their sons and daughters. Garrett had always taken his son and daughter out camping. Although his son had taken to it more than his daughter, but she liked it well enough. What she ended up liking more was horses and boats, but he didn't complain. The outdoors was the outdoors, no matter how they chose to enjoy it. But mind me, my nose is getting itchy. A log windbreak and a roaring fire chased the darkness and the cold away, and Garrett finished it off by using some saplings as bracing to create the pine and cedar insulation over the tent, using a shovel to create a snowbank where the wind was the harshest. With a sigh, he crawled into the tent and onto the ground cover and insulation he had gathered before wrapping himself up in a sleeping bag. The warmth was no illusion, and the steam from his sweat-soaked socks, left to dry in front of the fire, proved it. Had it not been a life or death situation, Garrett would have enjoyed it more. If I'm stuck like this, there will be others, he thought, on the actual highway in between towns. I'm prepared. I know what I'm doing. They won't. Garrett rolled over onto his side, facing away from the fire so that the light didn't sear into his eyeballs. He needed sleep. If he was stuck like this tomorrow, he would need every ounce of energy to get himself out. Or he was walking on snowshoes the rest of the way. Yeah, and I really want to do that. He blew out of breath as he closed his eyes. The only sound to break the silence was the crackle of the fire. And that was chapter 2. Don't mind the little breaks and not quite even points. It did take me a few tries to get it out. I couldn't seem to quite get it all in one take. Hopefully it's my editing, it makes it smooth enough that it's not too jarring. So we're still working on the website. There will be a few more products in there in the way of swag, even maybe some stationery and other things. My book will be a little easier to order shortly. The news that I have is I am pretty much done the second draft of A Season of Wolves, which is the second book in the series. Cannot tell you when that will be coming out exactly, but at least with it in the next stages of editing, it's getting closer to that. We've also started the work on the cover of A Season of Wolves, so maybe there might be a cover reveal in the next month. Maybe, hopefully, before I finish reading the book. So that's progress. To explain, because I'm sure... Oh, my nose is so itchy. I don't know why. Back when I first wrote this series, the first book was called After Oil. I actually have the original book. No, you can't get this anymore. It's kind of rare, which is a good thing because this really needed the edit that we did to make Ashes in Winter and A Season of Wolves. Basically what happened is the more we picked it apart and looked at the various storylines and the characters, some characters got merged. Like if you followed After Oil and you read After Oil and you enjoyed After Oil and you're here because this is what got you to this website in the first place, you're going to be fantastically surprised by what we did. Ashes in Winter is basically the first half of the book, and A Season of Wolves is the second half of the book, but with each of the storylines thoroughly expanded to stand on their own, but still, as the series was, meant to weave together. Which thrills me, because it's the story I was hoping it would be when I first wrote it. But didn't quite know how to do properly, and as I said, my skills came quite far. and I decided to give it the attention it deserved. So, if you read After a While, without spoiling it, Ashes in Winter stops at approximately the scene where there's the fight at the gate. It's also only dealing with storylines that took place in winter. Hence the title Ashes in Winter. It's the first book of this post-apocalyptic series, and it's in the middle of winter. Ashes in Winter, as After a While, the second half of After a While moved into spring, picks up in the spring with those storylines. Some of the characters were merged. Some characters were expanded. It now reads a lot more like the intended series I'd hoped it would read. So yeah, I'm much happier with it now. Now, that's not as to say, even though somehow, and I can possibly quote an author by the name of Anne Rice on this, is that it seems like no matter how many times we've read it, edited it, had me read it out loud, we still manage to find one thing that always needs to be corrected. But Anne Rice's quote was well quoted for saying she saluted out of 100,000 words and 13 read-throughs, 4 editing stages, and numerous editors and readers to help catch these things, that one typo that was stubborn enough to make it through. I'd hate to say it, that's a writer thing, like that's always going to happen. But this is why I have the challenge. If you spot a typo in my book, I definitely appreciate it being pointed out enough that I will give you a free copy of my book in ebook. So, with that said, you can now look towards chapter 3 for tomorrow.